Welcome back to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're diving into something I think a lot of you are going to find super relevant, executive effectiveness.
Yeah.
And we're lucky enough to have some excerpts you sent in from The Effective Executive by Peter Drucker.
Oh, a classic.
And just looking over them, I'm already fascinated.
Yeah. He's
There are so many intriguing concepts that we're going to unpack here, from time management to decision making.
right.
And I'm really excited to get into it with you because you always have a way of connecting the dots and extracting these incredible insights.
I'm excited too.
So let's jump right in. One of the first things that struck me when I was reading through this material is Drucker's emphasis on effectiveness being a learned skill.
Hmm.
It's not something you're necessarily born with.
Right.
This is great news for all of us, right?
It is. It's very empowering.
Yeah, absolutely. He even talks about these highly effective plotters. These are the people who might not be the most naturally gifted, but they achieve these incredible results through sheer determination and discipline.
I think we're all familiar with that type of person. Maybe we even are that type of person sometimes.
Yeah, maybe we are.
But it's interesting to see it kind of laid out there. It makes you realize it's not always about being the flashiest or the most charismatic.
Right. It's about
Sometimes it's about just putting in the work.
honing those skills and developing those right habits.
Exactly. And that's, I think, where Drucker really shines.
Yeah.
He provides this framework for understanding how those habits work
Yeah.
and how to apply them in, a knowledge work environment.
And that brings up another interesting point is that Drucker was writing this at a time when knowledge work was just emerging.
Right.
And now it's the dominant form of work for many of us.
Absolutely.
So his insights are even more relevant now than they were back then.
I think so. Yeah.
Now, one of the first things that Drucker does is differentiate between managers and executives. And he argues that not all managers are executives. What do you think is the key distinction there?
I think for him, it's all about impact. So you can have managers overseeing large teams or, really complex processes, but their decisions might not have a significant impact on the direction of the entire organization. An executive is someone whose decisions really shape the future of an organization.
Yeah, I like that. And he uses this example of a large market research department.
Right.
And how, just because a team is big
Doesn't mean it's effective.
doesn't mean it's effective. Exactly what really matters is the quality and impact of their work.
Right, the results.
Yeah. And that leads us to, I think, maybe Drucker's most famous principle.
Okay.
Effective executives know that time is the limiting factor. It's so simple, but so profound.
Right.
He's basically saying no matter how talented you are, no matter how skilled you are,
You only have so much time.
you only have so much time to get things done.
He actually shares a story about people losing track of time in a sealed room and how easily we can, fall victim to time blindness.
Oh, I think we've all had that experience.
Oh, yeah.
You look up and hours have gone by and you're like, wait, what did I even do?
Right. Where did the day go?
Exactly. And for knowledge workers, especially executives, time is their most precious resource.
Yeah.
I mean, they are constantly bombarded with demands and distractions.
All the time.
Right. So they need to be incredibly intentional about how they use their time.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the crux of it, isn't it?
It is.
Being intentional.
So what can we do about it?
Right.
Thankfully, Drucker gives us some answers.
Yeah.
He identifies some common time wasters. I think all of us have probably encountered these.
Let's hear them.
One of the biggest culprits, he says, is unnecessary meetings.
Oh, the dreaded meeting.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
It's so true.
meetings can be so useful,
Yeah.
but they can also be a huge time sink.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like we spend more time scheduling the meetings
All right.
than actually getting work done.
And sometimes they're just not necessary,
Exactly.
there's other ways to communicate or make decisions.
Right. He also warns against overstaffing. It might seem counterintuitive, but having too many people can actually hinder productivity.
Oh, yeah. It creates
Less complexity.
more communication, more chances for things to get, confused.
Right. More potential for those information malfunctions, as he calls them,
Right.
where the right information isn't reaching the right people at the right time.
Yeah. And that can just snowball into a lot of wasted time and effort.
Absolutely. So it's not about having this massive team. It's about having the right people in the right roles.
And making sure they're all on the same page.
Right. And then another thing he recommends is keeping a time log,
Hmm.
which might seem tedious, but it can be really eye-opening to actually see where your time is going.
Oh, yeah. I think we all have a sense of where we spend our time.
Yeah.
But until you actually track it,
Right.
It's kind of amazing what you discover.
So I encourage everyone listening to try it out.
Yeah, even just for a week,
Yeah.
just to get a sense of where those hours are going.
Now, I want to shift gears a bit
Okay.
and talk about another key principle that Drucker introduces. And it's the question, what can I contribute?
Sounds so simple.
It does, but it's actually really powerful because it shifts the focus from, just doing tasks
Right.
to really thinking about the impact you want to make.
It's about being proactive.
Exactly. And he tells this great story about a bank vice president who completely transformed his department by asking this very question.
What happened?
Well, he realized that his team, which was kind of bogged down in processing paperwork, could actually play a much more vital role in the bank's overall sales efforts.
Oh, interesting. So he found a way to add more value
Right.
than just, pushing paper around.
Exactly. And it's not just about driving results.
Right.
It's also about aligning your contributions with the values of the organization. So, for instance, if a hospital prioritizes patient care above all else, then every decision and action, even seemingly mundane ones, should ultimately contribute to that overarching goal.
So everything you do should be in service of that larger mission.
Exactly. He even talks about this Nurse Brian's rule.
Oh, what's that?
This is this idea that a seemingly small change driven by this commitment to excellent patient care can have this ripple effect throughout the organization.
Interesting. So it's about those small acts
Right.
that can actually have a big impact.
Exactly. And this leads us to another crucial aspect of effectiveness, making strengths productive.
Okay.
I love how Drucker uses that anecdote about Abraham Lincoln and General Grant
Oh, yeah.
to illustrate this point.
A classic story.
Lincoln knew that Grant, had his weaknesses, but he recognized Grant's exceptional strength as a military strategist.
Right.
And he appointed him commander-in-chief.
And that turned the tide of the war.
It was a pivotal decision.
So it's about recognizing strengths even in the face of weaknesses.
Exactly. And it's so counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
We're often conditioned to focus on fixing our weaknesses.
Right. Try to be well-rounded.
But Drucker argues that true effectiveness comes from identifying and leveraging those strengths,
In ourselves and others.
both in ourselves and in others. And he cautions against this common trap of trying to structure jobs to fit personalities. He says, jobs should be designed around tasks and objectives,
Personality.
not molded to accommodate, individual quirks.
I mean, that's kind of a radical idea, isn't it?
It is, and it might surprise some people who are used to these personality-based assessments.
Right. The idea of finding the perfect fit.
Exactly. But Drucker's point is that forcing a job to fit someone's personality can actually backfire. It can create mismatches and inefficiencies down the line.
So focus on the task, the job itself.
Right. Find the right person for the job, someone whose strengths naturally align with those tasks and responsibilities.
Okay, I like that.
And this leads to another really intriguing concept that he introduces these impossible jobs.
Impossible job.
He calls them impossible jobs.
What are those?
These are roles where the inherent structure makes it incredibly difficult for anyone to succeed,
Okay.
regardless of their skills or personality.
Give me an example.
He mentions university presidents, international vice presidents of multinational businesses.
Okay.
These are positions that have these built-in conflicts and competing demands
Right.
that make it almost impossible to meet everyone's expectations.
So it's not always a matter of, the person failing. It's the nature of the role itself.
Exactly. And then he goes on to make this pretty radical statement
What's that?
about replacing indispensable people.
Oh, that's interesting.
He argues that replacing even the most seemingly essential individuals can actually be beneficial for the organization.
How so?
Well, it allows for testing the strength of both the subordinate and the superior. It creates opportunities for others to step up, and it prevents stagnation.
So it's about building a more resilient organization.
It's exactly an organization that isn't overly reliant on any one individual.
Right, where leadership is more of a shared responsibility.
Right. So to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far,
Okay.
we've seen that effectiveness is this learned skill.
Yes.
It's not an innate trait. It's about understanding that time is your most valuable resource.
Right.
And being intentional about how you use it. It's about focusing on your contributions and aligning them with both results and values. And it's about making strengths productive.
Right.
Both in yourself and in others.
And challenging some of our assumptions.
Exactly. About things like personality assessments, job structures, even the role of indispensable people.
A lot to think about.
It is. So I want to pose a question to you, the listener.
Okay.
As we kind of move into this next section. Think about your own work.
Hmm.
Are there any areas where you could apply these principles?
Yeah.
What are some time wasters you could eliminate?
Right.
What strength could you leverage more effectively?
What contributes?
What contributions could you make that would have a greater impact on your organization?
Those are great questions.
So keep those in mind as we continue to explore
Yeah.
these ideas from Peter Drucker.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
We'll take it one step at a time. Welcome back. You know, before the break, we were talking about some pretty powerful concepts from Drucker
We were.
about the importance of time and, making strengths productive and focusing on contributions.
Yeah. And as promised, we're going to dig a little deeper into one of those concepts today. Specifically, how to become more effective by concentrating on the right things
Okay.
at the right time.
Concentration. Yeah. I mean, it might seem like a simple idea,
It does.
but in a world that's, constantly demanding our attention,
Right.
the ability to really focus
Yeah.
is becoming more and more valuable.
Absolutely. Especially for knowledge workers who are constantly, juggling tasks and bombarded with distractions.
Well, it's trying to have a conversation
Yeah.
in a crowded room.
Exactly. And Drucker suggests a pretty radical way to start improving our concentration.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
He calls it sloughing off yesterday.
Sloughing off yesterday.
I know it sounds a little violent,
It does.
but in the context of effectiveness, what does that actually mean?
Well, I think he's talking about challenging the status quo
Okay.
and letting go of things that are no longer serving us. He suggests that we regularly review our work and our programs and ask ourselves a simple question.
What's the question?
If we didn't already do this, would we go into it now?
So basically, being willing to abandon those activities that have become routine or comfortable,
Even if they were valuable at some point.
even if they were valuable at some point.
Yeah. It's so easy to get stuck in a rut,
It is.
doing things just because that's the way they've always been done.
Right, but effective executives, they're constantly evaluating
Right.
whether their efforts are still aligned with their goals.
And priorities.
And priorities, exactly. And they're willing to say no to yesterday in order to make room for tomorrow.
Yeah, it makes me think about, organizations that get attached to these outdated programs or initiatives.
Yeah, or even individuals
Right.
who hold on to these old habits
Yeah.
or mindsets.
It's like that old sweater
Yeah,
that you never wear, but you can't quite bring yourself to throw away.
exactly. And Drucker uses this thought-provoking example of government programs
Right.
that become these vested interests.
Oh, yeah.
They persist long after their initial purpose has faded.
They become more about self-preservation
Right.
than about serving the public good.
It's a powerful analogy.
It is.
And it challenges us to be honest with ourselves about why we're doing what we're doing.
Right.
Are we clinging to things out of habit?
Yeah.
Or because they truly contribute to our goals?
Yeah. Are we adding value?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now I know what you're thinking. This is all easier said than done.
It is. Letting go can be hard.
It can be. So how do we actually put this sloughing off yesterday into practice?
Well, one thing you can do is schedule regular reviews
Okay.
of your projects, your commitments.
Okay.
Set aside some time each month or even each week
Okay.
to look at your to-do list, your calendar, your long-term plans, and ask yourself that question. If I weren't already doing this, would I start now?
And if the answer is no,
Then it might be time to let go
to delegate.
or find a more efficient way to do it.
Exactly. And remember, this isn't just about tasks and projects.
Right.
This applies to mindsets, habits, even relationships
Anything that might be holding you back.
that are no longer serving you exactly. It's about creating that space for
Right.
new possibilities and growth.
So you've cleared out some of that clutter from yesterday.
Yeah.
Now you're faced with another challenge.
What's that?
Deciding what to focus on next.
Oh, that's a good one.
How do you prioritize all the things?
Right, because there's always so many demands competing for our attention.
So Drucker gives us a few pointers.
Okay, let's hear them.
He says, pick the future over the past.
Go.
Focus on opportunities.
Instead of problems.
Yeah, don't dwell on past failures.
Right, have that forward-looking mindset.
Exactly. He also says, choose your own direction.
Okay.
Don't just follow the crowd.
So be deliberate.
But intentional.
Focus, make your own path.
And he encourages us to aim high.
right.
Go for something that will make a real difference,
Even if it's risky.
even if it's risky. He tells this great story about a pharmaceutical company
Okay.
that achieves significant growth
Yeah.
by making strategic choices about when to enter new markets.
So they were thinking long-term.
Yes, instead of just trying to expand their existing product line,
Right.
They focused on the bigger picture,
All right.
timing their entry into these new markets
Yeah.
to coincide with major changes in healthcare systems.
Yeah, so they were really thinking strategically
They are.
about where to focus their efforts.
It's a great example of how thinking strategically and focusing on the right opportunities can lead to some pretty incredible results.
So it's not just about working hard.
It's about working smart.
Working smart, exactly. But even with the best intentions, we all know that priorities can shift.
Oh, yeah, the world's constantly changing.
But unexpectedly.
Right.
So we need to be adaptable.
Drucker acknowledges that
Yeah.
no plan survives contact with reality.
Right. So it's not about rigidly sticking to the plan,
But
having that clear sense of direction.
and being able to adjust
Reprioritize.
as needed.
As needed, exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of executive effectiveness.
What's that?
Decision-making.
Okay.
Drucker is very clear that making effective decisions is the key executive task.
I'm curious to hear his take on this.
Me too.
Because it seems like everyone has a different approach
They do.
to decision-making.
And what's really interesting here is that Drucker challenges that conventional wisdom of starting with the facts.
Oh, really?
He actually argues that you should begin with opinions.
Okay. Now that goes against everything I've ever learned.
And I know it sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
But his point is that facts are only meaningful within a specific context.
Mhm.
You need to first determine what's relevant
Okay.
and how to measure it.
Before you can even figure out what a fact is
Exact.
in a given situation.
So it's about having that clear framework
Right.
for understanding the problem before you even start looking at the data.
I see. So you need to kind of define the playing field
You do.
before you start gathering the pieces.
And he uses these contrasting examples of Theodore Vail,
Hmm.
who revolutionized the Bell telephone system,
Yeah.
and Alfred Sloan,
Okay.
who built General Motors into a global giant.
Two very different leaders
There were.
facing very different challenges.
But their decision-making processes
Yeah.
shared some key principles.
Like what?
Well, they both focused on understanding the underlying realities of their
Mhm.
situations,
Hmm.
identifying the key issues, and developing solutions that address the root causes.
Not just the symptoms.
Not just the symptoms. And they had a clear vision. And they weren't afraid to make bold decisions even when those decisions went against conventional wisdom.
So it's not about following a formula.
Right.
It's about,
It's about having that deep understanding of
Yeah.
the context and the courage to make those informed judgments.
so the combination of knowledge and
Yes.
intuition.
Exactly. Now, while Drucker doesn't prescribe, a rigid formula,
Okay.
he does outline a framework for effective decision-making.
Okay. I like a good framework. Let's hear it.
All right, so it involves 5 key steps.
5 steps. Okay. I'm ready.
The first step is classifying the situation.
Classifying. Okay.
This is about determining whether you're dealing with a generic situation
Okay.
that can be addressed with an existing rule or principle,
Mm-hmm.
or a unique event that requires a more tailored approach.
So are we dealing with a recurring problem
Right,
or
yeah.
something totally new?
Exactly, and this leads to the next step, defining the problem.
Defining the problem.
And Drucker emphasizes the importance of getting to the root cause.
Not just addressing the symptoms.
Not just the symptoms, he gives this compelling example of the challenge of retaining doctors in the military.
Okay.
The common assumption was that pay was the main issue,
Right.
but the real problem
Yeah.
was the structure of military medicine itself,
Okay.
which didn't align with the career aspirations of these young doctors.
So they were trying to solve the wrong
The-
problem.
They were misdiagnosing the problem, which led to some ineffective solutions.
Right. So define the problem accurately.
Yes, and once you've clearly defined the problem, the next step is to specify boundary conditions.
Boundary conditions. What are those?
Think of them as the constraints
Okay.
or parameters within
Oh.
which you're making this decision.
Okay.
So what are the essential requirements that must be met?
Right.
What are the non-negotiable?
The limitations.
The limitations, exactly. So it's about setting realistic expectations.
Right.
And understanding that you're not operating in a vacuum.
There's always constraints.
There are always constraints, whether they're
Right.
financial, logistical, even political.
Yeah. The real world is messy.
It is, and Drucker emphasizes that these boundary conditions should be specific and measurable.
Hmm.
He also warns against making decisions that rely on everything going perfectly.
Oh, yeah. He calls those miracle decisions.
He does.
And he's not a fan
He's not, because they're inherently risky.
because things rarely go according to plan.
They rarely do so once you've established those boundary conditions.
Okay.
The next step is to build in action.
Build in action.
This means ensuring that your decision is actually executable
Okay.
and that you have a clear plan for implementation.
So it's not enough to just make the decision.
It's not.
You have to figure out how to make it
We
happen
have to think through the logistics of how it will be carried out
in the real world
in the real world and who will be responsible.
for making it happen.
For making it happen, he stresses the importance of considering the capacities of the people who will be involved in implementing this decision.
So you need the right people
You do.
in the right roles.
He tells this cautionary tale about a chemical company
Where?
that made a strategic decision
Yeah.
but failed to communicate it effectively to the purchasing department,
Okay.
which resulted in them overstocking inventory.
Oh, that's costly.
It was very costly.
So communication is key.
Communication is key. And then the final step
Okay.
in Drucker's decision-making framework is creating feedback loops.
Feedback loops.
This means establishing mechanisms to monitor the decision's effectiveness
Okay.
and make adjustments as needed.
So you're not just setting it and forgetting it.
You're not.
You're constantly monitoring
You're
it
monitoring and adjusting.
and improving.
Exactly, because decisions are rarely perfect.
That's true.
And you need a way to track your progress and course correct if necessary.
So it's an ongoing process.
It is. And Drucker emphasizes the importance of direct observation, getting out of the office,
Yeah.
and seeing how things are actually playing out on the ground.
He uses that example of military officers who inspect the food served to their troops.
Instead of relying on reports.
Right. It's about grounding your decisions in reality.
Exactly. So to recap, Drucker's decision-making framework involves classifying the situation,
Right.
defining the problem, specifying boundary conditions, building an action.
And creating feedback loops.
And creating feedback loops. But what about the decision itself?
Yeah.
How do you know when you've made the right decision?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is. And Drucker reminds us that a decision is ultimately a judgment.
Okay.
It's a choice between alternatives.
Yeah.
And it's rarely a clear-cut case of right versus wrong.
So there's always an element of uncertainty
There is.
and risk.
And he challenges another common assumption
What's that?
about decision-making.
Right.
The idea that decisions should be based on consensus.
Really? But I thought getting everyone on board was important.
I know it seems counterintuitive,
He does.
but Drucker and other great leaders like Alfred Sloan recognize that disagreement
Yeah.
is actually essential
For making sound decisions.
for making sound decisions. Didn't Sloan famously say,
He did.
I propose we postpone further discussion until our next meeting to give ourselves time to develop disagreement.
He believed that healthy debate
Yeah.
and diverse perspectives
Lead to better outcomes.
disagreement forces you to challenge assumptions.
Right.
Consider different viewpoints.
And ultimately,
arrive at a more robust decision.
exactly. So it's not about avoiding conflict. It's about,
It's about harnessing it constructively.
and this brings us to another crucial element,
What's that?
imagination.
Ah, yes, the power of imagination.
Drucker argues that imagination is essential for developing those creative solutions.
Especially when you're dealing with these complex and uncertain situations.
And he sees disagreement
Yeah.
as a key catalyst
For sparking imagination.
for sparking imagination, by forcing people to think differently.
To challenge the status quo.
It opens up new possibilities
So it's about creating that culture.
where people feel comfortable pushing those boundaries,
Challenging assumptions.
exploring unconventional ideas.
Yeah, that's how innovation happens.
It is. And this is especially important in today's world,
Right.
where organizations need to be so adaptable
Agile.
and innovative to thrive.
So you made a decision. Now, how do you choose the right course of action?
That's a good question.
Drucker has a suggestion.
Okay.
He says, first, ask yourself, what will happen if we do nothing?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah. So if the situation will likely resolve itself
Right.
without intervention,
Then maybe taking action is unnecessary.
or even counterproductive,
Right. But if action is required,
then you need to weigh the risks and the benefits.
of acting versus not acting,
Exactly. Compare the effort and the risk of acting to the risk of inaction.
and be decisive.
Right.
Once you've made that decision, commit to it and see it through.
Drucker cautions against hedging your bets.
Or taking half measures.
Right. Go all in.
But even with the best intentions, sometimes things don't go as planned.
They don't. That's why those feedback mechanisms are so important.
You need to be able to monitor progress and make adjustments
It's needed.
as needed. And And this is where Drucker's advice about sloughing off yesterday comes back into play.
Right.
Because even decisions that were initially sound might need to be revisited and revised as circumstances change.
So it's an ongoing process.
It is.
Not a one-time event.
Exactly. And it's a skill that can be developed over time. And Drucker believes that this ability to make effective decisions is increasingly important for all knowledge workers.
Not just executives.
Not just those at the top.
I can see that with the rise of technology.
Right.
And the increasing complexity of work.
Decision-making is becoming more distributed.
Yeah. Everyone needs to be able to make good judgments.
And contribute.
To the organization's success.
And Drucker sees this as a positive thing.
Empowering.
It empowers individuals and it creates a more agile and responsive organization.
So now even middle managers
are
being asked to make more decisions.
And he has this really interesting point about how the computer, despite all its capabilities, will actually force us to become better decision makers.
That's counterintuitive. How can a machine make us better at something that's so human?
Well, the computer excels at computation and handling routine tasks.
So frees us up.
It frees us up to focus on those higher level
thinking
and decision-making.
So it's not about replacing human decision-making.
It's about enhancing it.
Elevating it.
Exactly. And he also predicts that the computer will empower those middle managers to become even more effective decision-makers.
Because they'll have more time.
They'll have more time, more mental bandwidth to focus on those strategic issues.
And contribute to the big picture.
Right. It's a powerful idea.
It is.
That challenges those conventional assumptions.
About the role of technology.
About the role of technology in the workplace.
So technology is a tool, and how we use it determines its impact.
Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more point that Drucker makes about effective executives. He says they focus on opportunities.
Rather than problems.
It's
a mindset shift.
It is. It's easy to get bogged down in the problems.
But effective leaders look for the possibilities.
Even in those challenging situations.
They have a solution-oriented mindset.
They do. All right, listener. We're going to pause here for now. When we come back, we'll be exploring Drucker's insights on the importance of building effective relationships, communicating clearly, and developing ourselves and others.
I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, it feels like we've been on quite a journey with Peter Drucker.
We have.
Exploring everything from time management to decision-making.
I feel like we've learned so much.
I know. And through it all, you know, he emphasizes that effectiveness isn't about some innate talent or charisma.
It's about developing those habits.
It is.
Those mindsets, those skills.
It's about putting in the work.
Yeah.
And one of the key takeaways for me has been the importance of being intentional. You know, and deliberate in everything we do, whether it's managing our time, making decisions, or developing ourselves and others.
Drucker reminds us that we're not just cogs in a machine.
We're not.
You know, we're knowledge workers with the ability to shape our own effectiveness and the success of our organizations.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on a few more of Drucker's insights that I think are particularly relevant for today's executives. He talks about the importance of building effective relationships, both within and outside the organization.
Right, so not just with your team.
Not just with your team.
But with everyone you work with.
With everyone you work with.
Yeah.
And he argues that effective executives understand that they can't achieve anything alone.
Right, they need to build strong relationships.
You need to collaborate.
With their teams, their peers, their superiors, even external stakeholders.
It's about recognizing that leadership is not about wielding power.
But about building consensus.
Exactly. And he also stresses the importance of clear communication. He says that effective executives are skilled communicators.
Right.
They're able to articulate their vision, explain their decisions, and inspire others to action.
That's so important in today's world.
It is.
Where there's so much noise.
Right. Being able to cut through the noise and communicate clearly is essential.
And it's not just about conveying information. Drucker also talks about the importance of listening. Of really understanding
the perspectives and concerns of others.
He reminds us that communication is a two-way street.
It is.
And that effective leaders are as skilled at listening as they are at speaking.
Now, another key theme that runs through Drucker's work is this idea of continuous learning and development.
Right.
He argues that effective executives are lifelong learners.
always seeking out new knowledge,
Always
challenging their own assumptions.
challenging their assumptions. And it's not just about personal growth.
Right.
It's also about developing others, creating this culture of learning within the organization.
He sees that as a key responsibility
Yeah.
of any leader to foster the growth and development of those around them
To empower others to reach their full potential.
and contribute to the success of the organization.
Exactly. Now, I know we've covered a lot of ground today,
We have.
but I want to circle back
Okay.
to one of Drucker's most provocative ideas.
Oh, which one?
This concern about the potential for knowledge workers
Yeah.
to become alienated from their work.
Oh, yeah. He talks about how
He does.
if knowledge work is going to be effective, it needs to be meaningful.
It needs to be
Talk
fulfilling.
to people doing it.
He emphasizes the importance of aligning our work with our values,
Our strengths.
our strengths, and our sense of purpose.
It's not just about getting things done.
It's not.
It's about doing work that matters.
That makes a difference.
That gives us a sense of satisfaction.
An accomplishment.
And that brings us back to that question
Yes.
that we posed earlier.
Does your work fulfill your psychological needs?
Does it align with your personal values?
It's a question I think every knowledge worker should ask themselves.
This is a big one.
It is. Because ultimately, effectiveness is not just about achieving those external results.
Right.
It's about finding fulfillment.
And meaning in the work itself.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
Thank you, listener, for joining us on this deep dive.
Into the wisdom of Peter Drucker.
We hope you've gleaned some valuable insights
And maybe even a few aha moments.
along the way
And we hope you'll continue to explore Drucker's work
and apply his principles
to your own journey.
as an effective executive.
Thanks for listening.